In this session, we'll provide a brief feature overview and demonstration of Centrify Service Suite's new advanced monitoring capability. So what we hear from our customers, for example, is around compliance. They're looking for greater visibility and reporting of admin activity on critical Linux servers. In particular, they're mentioned that they're in the dark and that they lose identity context if an administrator sudos to root. In this scenario, OS logging doesn't help. It's not capturing specifically who was sitting behind the keyboard when they executed a particular command while they've sudoed to root. Now, it's not ideal that we give administrators these broad powers, but the reality is there are users in the environment that have these types of permissions. And in that scenario, it's really hard to tell who has modified a particular Linux system file or who has executed what process, etc. Customers also mentioned that in their current monitoring solutions that they have blind spots, in particular where it's based on a jump box style architecture for session recording. For example, if an administrator were to log in directly to the console, a jump box based approach is not going to capture those sessions. So we'll demonstrate how Centrify's unique architecture is able to mitigate that particular blind spot. In this demonstration, first we're going to demonstrate how we can report quickly and clearly an administrator's actions, whether they're logged in with their named account or if they've sudoed over to the root account. From there, we'll demonstrate our session recording playback functionality, and then from there, we'll address how Centrify addresses those audit blind spots, such as attribution of an administrator's actions, even after they've sudoed or DZ-doed over to the root account. We'll demonstrate who has executed what process, who has modified what file. And then from there, we'll show how our unique architecture prevents the sidestep of session audit and session audit monitoring. For our first use case, let's dive right into reporting. Let's say the boss wants to find out all the privileged commands that were run on a set of servers within the past couple hours. Let's say we're trying to troubleshoot some sort of production-related issue that's going on. Not a problem. So we have our monitored execution report, and what this report will tell us is for all the commands that are of interest to us, who were the users that ran the commands, when were these commands run, and within the context of what privileged user. So for example, let's say we want to take a look at all the commands that ran after 11 o'clock today. So we'll go ahead and then we can quickly show the report, and now we could see who the end user was that ran the command and on what machine the command was run and the specific command that was executed. And we could also see the target user or the user context within which the command was run. So here we see that we have an end user, Nancy, that ran the if config command as Nancy. Next, we see the same user, Nancy, running the password command. She tried to change the password for another user, rsavage, but this time around, she ran the command as the root user. In effect, she had sudoed over to the root user and attempted to change the password for another account. All that said, we still have that identity context to know that it was in fact Nancy that executed that particular command. All right, moving on to the next reporting use case. For example, we have our file monitor report. What I've done here is I've actually pre-created a report that's going to focus on any changes that are made to the etc host file as an example. So we'll go ahead and quickly run that report. And what we can see here, for example, if we pick on Nancy, we can see that Nancy on March 10th at 1:25 edited the etc host file using VI. She ran this command within the context of the root user. Or in another scenario, here we could see Diana editing the same file using VI, running this command again as the root user. But what's interesting here is we could see that she was in the Nancy's home directory. So what this can possibly tell us is that Our user Diana had SU'd over to root and then perhaps SU'd over to Nancy and then attempted to edit the file, which might be a little bit curious. So what we could do then next is actually view a replay of that particular session, given that we're seeing some anomalous behavior here. Okay, so now I have the session recording for Diana, and what you can see are, number one is the DVR-like playback controls for our session recording. Number two is on the left, you'll see the actual index listing of commands and the date timestamp. So we can go ahead and play the session back, and what you'll see, number one, is Diana has logged in as herself, and now she is doing a privilege elevation to become the root user. And then once she becomes the root user, you'll see that she then SUs over to Nancy. Once she becomes Nancy, she then attempts to edit the Etsy host file using Nancy's account. So what the session recording playback capability provides are two things. Number one is we maintain the identity context of the person sitting behind the keyboard, even when that person switches user accounts once they've logged in. Number two is that the session recording provides additional context or clarity behind the information we see within a report. Okay, now let's talk about what's happening from the perspective of an administrator. In the top two windows, what we see here are logins into two different Linux machines logged in as the same user. On the bottom, what I'm doing is tailing the varlog message file for the respective machines. The machine on the right in black over here, I have our advanced monitoring disabled, and over here our advanced monitoring is enabled. And what we'll illustrate is the blind spots that you would encounter if you were to just rely on OS logging alone. So for example, let's say right now I'm logged in as Diana, and now I'm going to sudo over to the root user account. And you can see in the varlog message file that that activity is now being tracked, as you would expect whenever you do a privilege elevation within Unix. Now I'm the root user. At this point, any of my actions were in the dark from the perspective of the operating system. We're not able to see what's going on. So for example, if I were to change the password for a user, a local user account, for example, let's say, let's change the password for Mr. Savage here. What you're not seeing is any audit logging activity that's occurring in our varlog message file. On the other hand, if I look over here on the left, I'll do the same exact thing. I'll SU over to the root user account. I'm now logged in as root. And over here with our advanced auditing enabled, if I were to change the password for, for a local user account, let's say. Even though I'm logged in as root, what you're seeing is that audit activity being tracked. That's number one. Number two is even though I'm logged in as root, what you could see in the varlog message file is that it was in fact Diana that executed that command. Last point I'd like to make is regarding blind spots. If you notice, I'm logging directly into the Windows server. I'm logging directly into the Linux machines using PuTTY. I'm not going through a jump box. So in short, there's no jump box to sidestep. All the auditing is taking directly on the target system that we're interested in. Okay, that wraps up the demonstration. To recap, first thing we showed are reports which quickly and clearly show an administrator's actions, regardless of whether they're logged in as themselves or they've SU'd to the root account. From there, we demonstrated our session recording playback functionality for Windows and Linux. And then from there, we demonstrated how Centrify addresses audit blind spots, such as the ability to attribute an administrator's actions even after they've suited over to root. From there, we were able to demonstrate who has executed what process or who has modified a particular sensitive operating system file. And then finally, we were able to demonstrate through our unique architecture how we're able to prevent the sidestep of session auditing and monitoring. Thanks again for your time.